Alright, I've been asked to make solo builds for Steel Path bosses. Um, and I think I got something that would be generally applicable to almost all of them. Uh, Pretty simple setup. For these builds, I'm going to be assuming that you've completed the star chart because obviously it's Steel Path, and you've spent some time in arbitration. You are going to need a couple galvanized mods, so make sure that you trade your Vitus Essence in from the Vitus Essence dealer. Let's go over the build. For most of these, I'm going to be assuming no arcanes. And I tried to make them as cheap and generally applicable as possible. Lots of utility, a bit of synergy, but nothing that requires prime mods. I made sure to get rid of them. Might include a couple Emerald mods eventually, but not for this. Energy Siphon for just very slow, passive energy regen. Redirection, Vitality, Steel Fiber, Adaptation. Just make you as tanky as possible. Obviously, for Steel Path, the enemy damage output is so much higher. Just trying to make you survive as much as possible. I've chosen Neja, and this would apply to the basic Neja also. It's a 2 Forma build. And to be honest, you don't even need one of them. I got an Aura Forma and Neja. I think I polarized one of the dash polarities because he comes in 8 with D and V, so it would be one of these. Anyway, so an adaptation, redirection, vitality, steel fiber, just pure tank across the board, as much effective HP as possible. For the bottom is more utility. I did equilibrium and flow. Equilibrium allows you to pick up energy and gain health, and pick up health and gain energy, and that's going to come into play later. I'll show you with the pet that I have. Rush, obviously not needed, but it's kind of nice being able to zip around and clear the nose a little faster. Hunter Adrenaline for recovering energy from health, 45%. So if we do run out of energy for whatever reason, we'll be able to cast Warding Halo, and it'll give us time as sort of a panic button to be able to recover our health using Blazing Chakram. Let's go over his abilities real quick, just as a quick overview. I'm sure most of you know this. Firewalker, a speed up, a 25% speed increase, which is the main reason to use him, but obviously the fire itself provides CC with a slight burn effect. It's 200 damage per second because we have no additional power strength, it's 100%. But there's also the interaction between that and Blazing Chakram. If you throw your 2 and then hit it again, when you have your 1 up, you will teleport and then explode in an AoE, which for this, because we have no range, is going to be 6 meters. It's a nice little interaction, good CC, especially if you have some range on it. You can force a fire proc on a bunch of enemies in, say, a 12 meter, 18 meter radius, depending on what your build is. Warding Halo, it's one of the bread and butter items for Neja. Gives you a shield as well as 90% damage reduction. And everything else is kind of gravy, but the big thing for this is just the utility we're going to be getting from it is just that it's an additional health pool. It does have an AoE burn, costs 75 energy. Damage per second is dealt in slash, which is nice for condition overload. And it does give you several seconds of iframes. And for this, because we have no additional power strength, is going to have a 2.5 damage absorption multiplier. Divine Spears is a panic button. It provides very weak damage scaling, but can be very, very potent at much lower levels. But that's not the case here. This is more for a panic button so you can safely clear a room where, say, we're in the situation where we have health, or we don't have health, but we have energy. We would still be able to roll into a room or maybe chakram into the room and then immediately press 4 to CC everything. So anyway, this is the build that I'm going to be using. Let's go over to the other ones. We're going to be using the Kuvacomb. Very, very, very potent weapon. Crit chance, crit damage, because this is even though it is a status monster, it still heavily benefits from crit chance and crit damage. attack speed to help with the passive of the more you shoot, the more bullets ramp up. Galvanized Hell, multi-shot, Galvanized Savvy for status, chance, and damage. And we're going to be going with a corrosive heat build where heat is more than corrosive. And also, this is a heat comb. So if your numbers don't match up directly, that's what the difference is. And it's like a 50%. And incendiary just to make sure that it gets over. So when a status does proc, more often than not, it's going to be a heat proc, which will give us some scaling damage. And vigilante supplies for ammo, because this thing loves to chug ammo. Gonna have our primer. I went with the magnetic nucor. It's a 50%, so not a maxed out nucor, but it's mostly just to get the proc on. Went with viral heat. So we have frostbite, pistol pestilence to give us viral, scorch to give us heat procs. Not very well balanced. Obviously, I could lower this down, but I just need the status chance as high as possible without viral being completely overwhelming to heat, because we want everything to proc. Barrel diffusion, I did not go with galvanized because I want the dodge speed. Lethal torrent for fire rate and more multi-shot. Seeker to help punch through enemies. It helps the chains apply to more. And this is just a really good, even if you have like a Riven, you want punch through on it. I also have a multi-shot gas one for viral. But not necessary because this is a primer. We have 3 utility slots on here, even though it is a utility weapon, just to make life a little nicer. We have holster speed because we are going to be using this as a primer. You are going to be able to swap to this weapon extremely fast. This speeds it up to where it is almost instant. And if you're using this as a primer, I would highly recommend running a holster speed mod somewhere in your build. You could, if you wanted to save a spot, you could even get rid of this and put like a synthetic mod in your Exilus on your Warframe that gives you holster speed. And you could potentially save a slot here also. Eject magazine is really good utility. While the weapon is holstered, this will reload the weapon as you're not using it. So basically every 5 seconds, your magazine will be completely refilled on your sidearm, your nucor, just from it being holstered. And this applies per second, so you don't need to unload the entire clip into an enemy. So you're going to zap it for like a second, like a group of them, maybe 2, and then you'll holster it, hit them with your melee or your primary, whichever is the case. And by the time you're to the next group of enemies, you'll have a full magazine, and it just makes for a much, much more fluid gameplay. This slot is pure preference. I have used the Saxum Spittle for the AoE effect mainly. It just provides an additional proc. It's a blast proc. And an impact damage like stun. But the stun's really weak. It's only 1 proc. But if you have lifted enemies, i.e. Neja's 4, you can apply this to a bunch of enemies at once, and it has an instant refresh if they're lifted. But at the same time, where this mod doesn't say it, is if they're on the ground, there's still a proc, but there's a cooldown on it. So with Neja, you have the option of doing lifted or not lifted. And so you have the blast and impact proc, which definitely helps out with this. For primers, I would highly recommend the nucor. There is also the epitaph, but I am not using it just because where you have to get it is so much later in the game, and I wanted this to be a steel path focused build. Most people don't do the later railjack missions until after they've done steel path, or at least gotten a couple nodes into steel path. So that's what this is focused around. And by the time you start steel path, you should definitely have a couple of liches down, and this should be priority number 2 behind the Brahma to pick up out of a lich. Going to the melee. Old Faithful for most of this is going to be the Stropha. I am not really going to be messing with the setup too much. except to change the element. Because the first boss is going to be Grineer, went with Corrosive. And it is a combo build, a combo counter build. Got Reflex Coil and Focus Energy for heavy attack efficiency to max it out. So when I heavy attack and do the bigger damage, it only drains 10%, because this is capped. Even though this says 40 and this says 60, it says 100% heavy attack efficiency. That is not going to be the case. It's going to be 90%. It's still going to take some. Condition Overload for scaling damage. Crit damage. We want double crit damage on this. Plus the Gladiator Might passive, which is combo chance per combo multiplier. This will give us the equivalent of old Blood Rush and will allow us to reach slightly into reds. Blood Rush is pure crit chance per combo, and we went with Corrosive because we're going to be doing mostly Grineer. And we'll swap out the other ones for other bosses. But this is just the overview. No reason to take an Aro. I'm just showing you don't need nodes for Steel Path. Though if you were, and I would assume you do have a bunch, Zenuric is a very, very solid option. Naramon is also very good, especially with the Power Strike node. But I have everything unlocked, and I just wanted to show you don't need it to be able to do Steel Path bosses. It's pure ease of use. And if you do have your stuff unlocked, I would say Zenuric. This is the one that I run with 90% of the time. Unless I really have something that takes care of energy, then I'll go Naramon. And ironically, the most important part of the build is actually the pet. Because this is Steel Path. I'm assuming you spent some time in Deimos. This is a somewhat specific build, but I'm absolutely falling in love with it. It's pretty simple to get. It's got a wide variety of mods on here, some from Cetus, some from Fortuna, but the main reason for this is the preset mods, Viral Quills. Launches 6 quills at enemies within 20 meters, each dealing 60 viral damage with a 40% status chance. If the target is affected by viral status, a spore is added. 4-second cooldown. And Panzer Devolution, infinite revives basically. It puts that little worm over your shoulder. The interaction that I'm going for with this is also with the Synth Deconstruct. 25% chance to drop health orbs when killed. When enemies affected by the companion are killed. And Synth Fiber. These are Fortuna mods. I highly, highly recommend you go pick these up if you haven't already. They are bounty mods. And I think they're on a rotation, so you might have to check. The interaction between all of these is absolutely fantastic. The viral damage that's dealt by the spores counts toward Hunter recovery. So even though the spores are like 60 damage, and they deal like a slight tick, every time something's infected or it gets hit with a spore, it deals 60 damage. Well, this isn't an AoE, okay? So it's 60 viral damage and an AoE, what is it, like 20 meters or something like that? It launches 6 quills at enemies within 20 meters. This applies toward Hunter recovery, and you actually recover health using this interaction. Your frame does. Which is also the reason why we're running Equilibrium, is because the interaction between this and this, Synth Deconstruct and Synth Fiber, the viral quills count as damage on the enemy. So as you're running through and popping the spores, you're infecting new enemies. So like a survival mission, this is absolutely wonderful. As the enemies are killed, every 4, or basically every 1 in 4 drops a health orb, which you pick up every single time because of Synth Fiber. Health orbs increase armor for companions by 100% for 12 seconds. Now the big thing with this is that because you have Equilibrium on and you have this, even if you are full health on your frame, you will still pick up the health orb. So you are constantly proccing Equilibrium. And even on a lot of my more built frames, I am now running, when I am using the Panzer, I am running without flow at all. So these interactions between these three is absolutely fantastic. You get health and energy per second, and it's a free viral proc that you can sort of spread. Now, the spores, admittedly, take a minute to ramp up, but the cooldown on this is every 4 seconds. So it's not spamming them per se, but for a passive ability, just passive viral, this is absolutely fantastic and definitely lowers the gear check of doing Steel Path and allows you to easily go further into your survival missions and your farming missions. Pack leader to help your animal recover. If you noticed, I am only running health and armor. Shield, there's no way to amp the strength of the shield, even with like linked shields. It only gets up to 691, even with me running the shield mod redirection on my frame. Because I'm using Nezha and because his shield is so small, it doesn't help that much. So I'm running without it. For some reason, there's a bit of a glitch where it's not increasing Nezha's shield that much. You can see it's 370, 150. So you're not getting the full 440%, and I don't know what the case or what the deal with that is. So I haven't been running shields at all. But this is the setup that I've been using. This one. As you can see, the health, much bigger health, much more effective damage, and then you have the synth fiber increase on top of this. So another bit of health. But yeah, this is the setup I'm going to be using for most of my missions. This is really easy to get. Every single mod here is farmable, and you should have almost all of them for your Steel Path missions. The hardest ones are going to be the bounty drops and from arbitration. This is just a time sink. So anyway, I just wanted to explain the builds, and I'm going to get to work on the bosses. But this is going to be the setup for now. If I change it in the future videos for each boss, I'll say what it is and the reason behind it. But for a starter, this is what my setup is going to be. Thank you.